Imagine turning a simple idea in your basement into a headline grabbing 8-figure empire that dances across the industry stage and get this, turns into a landmark sale to a titan like Avery Labels. I am so excited because today I'm sitting down with Julie Ellis, the visionary co-founder behind Mabel's Labels, who did just that. Her journey is going to be, this whole episode is going to be a masterclass in learning how to scale and leadership, and of course, how to capture those big, gorgeous goals, which happens to be her book. So get ready because we are going to dive into something absolutely extraordinary. Love to welcome you, Julie Ellis. Thank you so much for being on this podcast today. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh my gosh, I am so excited that you are here. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be talking to somebody who did it, who not is just not talking the talk, but you walk the walk. And I'm like, it's not just an interview, like this whole thing is going to be really the first step of our listeners of how to turn your vision into what's really possible. So I am grateful for you. Before we dive in, tell us who Julie Ellis is.
So yeah, before I love to think about, I always tell my kids, like, who knows where you'll end up, because my path has been super eclectic. So I have a university degree in dance with a focus on teaching. And when I finished university, I joined a major financial institution in Canada on a management training program. And I went through that, ultimately becoming a licensed financial planner. And so I was working in a corporate job as a licensed financial planner, and I started having babies. And a couple of friends of mine from university and I started thinking that maybe there was something more we could do to control our own lives and have more time, which,
Yeah.
living the dream. It wasn't with more time, but and we thought that there were things we could do. We were sending our kids to daycare and to activities, and they were saying, please label everything. And when we asked how to label things, they were saying masking tape and a Sharpie. And we didn't really like that solution. We thought there were cuter solutions that could be found, and there were. And we decided to start a company in North America making personalized labels for kids. And so we turned on the lights in the basement one March day, 21 years ago, and
Wow.
started filling orders.
Oh my goodness. Now,
Yeah.
how did that? You make it sound like, oh, we just decided to do this
Huh.
and then we're in the basement filling orders. But I
Right.
know there was more to it in the beginning.
There was, for sure. We did just decide to do it. Like, we decided we were going to go for it, but it did take us about a year of research and testing to find the right equipment that we wanted to use. And that year was spent, talking to experts in the industry, looking for, nobody was doing what we were doing. I mean, we were the first to market in North America. And so we were looking at, what existing equipment could we repurpose and use to make what we wanted, and how could we do that ourselves without, and how much would it cost, and all the different things that went along with that. And so we then, I would say, after the actual launch, that research and development really never stopped.
So I'm curious, when you first, because it's you and how many other women that are part of
There were
this?
4 founders, so
Four
myself and
founders.
three others. Yeah.
So when the four of you got together and you're like, hey, let's start this label company because we want something cuter for our kids. We don't want the masking
Mhm.
tape and marker. Did you expect it to become what it became?
Yes and no. I mean, in the everyday, day to day, I would say we were, slogging it away in the basement. But in another way, like when we made up the list, we made a spreadsheet of all the people we knew. And then we had to cut it back because we didn't have enough money for all the stamps we needed to send letters to them all.
Oh my gosh.
In the day when, like, not everybody had email, like email wasn't what it was. There wasn't social media. So we did a letter writing campaign to our friends, and we sent out all the letters we could. But the night that we sat at someone's kitchen table and stuffed those into envelopes, somebody had a cheap bottle of champagne and we popped it open and said, here's to the IPO one day. And an IPO is what happens when you go public and go on the stock market. And so on some level, we did always have big dreams for the business and what we wanted to do with it.
That's incredible. I love it. I love that you had that vision
Yeah.
and you know just from getting together. And I think when women come together, especially like something magical, something intense really happens when they're all on the
Mhm.
same page and they have the same vision. I don't know, it's just so exciting. So, did you guys set your goals when you were planning to accomplish this, or were you kind of winging it until you hit a point where you're like, let's get more strategic?
We were always pretty goal oriented. I don't think we were strategic about crafting ourselves an exit at the end. That took us a long time to kind of come around to, but we were always very strategic in, we very formally set goals, we set responsibilities, we divvied things up, and we were very accountable to each other. And so I think there was a rhythm of, okay, here's where we are, here's where we want to go, here's how we're going to get there. And like, let's face it, at the buffet of choice as an entrepreneur running a business, you have to pick the handful of things, and it feels painful and small, the amount that you can actually tackle compared to what you want to take on. And so that process, I think, helped us stay really focused. And every now and again, we'd say, why? We have this great idea. Why does it never get off the list? Like, don't we want to do something about it? And it was like, we have better ideas. And so, but it is that hard part of, you have to choose the things that you will do and go deep on them to execute really well and get them launched and get them moving and all the things. Because if you try and do 20 things, you're just going to skim the surface of it all. And, one thing after another, they're going to fall apart a little bit.
That is so hard to do because I mean, I think as
So hard.
entrepreneurs, like the wheels are always spinning of how we could do things better, faster, smarter.
Yeah.
And so it is sometimes really hard to reel it back in and stay
Hmm.
focused. And that's pretty cool that you had four of you to kind of
Yes.
hold each one of you accountable.
Yes. And I think that like the beauty of four is that like I'm kind of a natural operationalizer. Like I can, see the ideas, I can like discern really well what I think might work, and I can see the paths to getting there with it. Other people are the ones, like one of my business partners was an amazing idea generator, and but that discernment and the operationalizing of them wasn't as much her strength. And so then you start to find these roles that you can fall into, because not everybody can go from like the very origin to the very finish line.
That's interesting. And that just happened organically for you guys because you were
It
just
did.
friends. It wasn't like you went out and searched for each other.
No. No, exactly. And so it was interesting, and it's interesting to find within a group and figure out how to lever on each other's strengths.
So when you guys did that toast with the champagne, the cheap champagne, I might add, because I love that you said
It
that because
was.
there's something about that, right? And you said, here's to when we're an IPO, right?
Hmm.
How long did it take from that moment until you reached what that big goal, whatever that big goal was that you were really focusing on?
Well, I mean, we sold the business nearly 13 years later. It was just about 12 years and 8 months or so later that we sold the business. And, that was the huge pinnacle of everything we had really built for. And although we didn't always say we're building this to sell the business, we did agree on some things, like none of us particularly saw us handing the business to our kids. So that was one thing. And we also, I think, saw ourselves, after we had got into eight figures, we realized that to build into the mid eight figures, we were going to face yet another journey of a climb, right? So, you climb and then you hit these points and then you climb again. And we knew that the climb into the mid eights was going to be mean more systems changes, more expertise needed on the team, more expertise needed at the leadership level. And so we were asking questions about how do we want to lead this company into that next era? And then one day the phone rang and it was Avery Labels. And they said, have you ever thought about selling your business? And it was just sort of like the universe moved and we got that call and we were kind of like, and we had been approached before and our attitude about it was always like, well, it's not for sale, but like tell us what you've got in mind. Because there's no harm in having conversation. And
Mhm.
so we had some conversation and it fairly quickly turned into like a real negotiation. And we really liked some things about how they run the businesses they acquire. And one of them was, our people, our building, our business was really going to stay, fairly intact. And yes, there were going to be new goals and new pace and a new, set of bosses, but a lot of things that were important to us were going to stay in place. And so, there was a cultural fit as well as a financial fit in terms of how we went about working with them.
Interesting. I can't even imagine
Hmm.
what that had to be like when Avery Labels calls you and says,
We were
uh,
like, what? They know
right?
about us? Like, oh
I'm
my
like,
God.
am I getting punked right now? Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, yeah,
That had to be just, oh my gosh. Like,
totally.
you're in your thing. And yes, you have goals, but sometimes even with goals, you're just we're doing our thing. And you don't even realize how far you got until you kind of take a peek back and you're like,
Exactly.
wow, like Avery
Yes.
Labels? That's insane. That is so cool.
Yeah.
So I'm curious because how big did you grow your team before you
We
sold it?
we had over 40 people.
And what type of like key strategies, leadership strategies did you implement to as you grew your team? So if somebody is right now listening and they're like, I want to grow my team, what do you feel was very important in order to do that?
We always prioritized like the strategic planning aspect of the business. So, and we often, even from the very early days, brought in outside people to help us with those sessions. So, within a few years of starting the business, we had started to work with an accountant we were referred to by a mentor of ours. And that accountant helped lead our strategic planning because we were looking for a strategist, not just somebody who would fill out paperwork for us in our accountant. And, he ended up being pretty pivotal. And in later years, we had other advisors who would also join in those sessions. So we always tried to, you know, put some really smart people in the room with us. I think that's really important. And then also, sort of you bring the outside, you also get to a point in the business where you got to bring your management team to the table. And, it would have been easy to just say it was the four of us because four founders is a lot when you start adding the leadership in. But
Mhm.
we always did because, you needed the finance person to sit at the table and talk about the actual budget. You needed the marketing director to sit there with them and talk about what they thought their team could execute or what their ideas were.
You
And
know,
so I think it was really elevating those leaders as well as bringing around some really smart people to help us really work through our problems and set the course.
that you bring up such a good point because sometimes we think, and you, like you said, you have four co-founders. So you would think between the four of
Mhm.
you, you could figure it out for lack of a better term, right? But you need those outside expertise eyes and ears in the room to help navigate you.
You
So
do. And because I think there's an aspect of entrepreneurship, well, I know there is an aspect of entrepreneurship where, most of the time you don't feel like you know what you're doing. And
yes.
so, in fact, I will argue that if you know what you're doing, you just wait till tomorrow. Because it is like that. It's like
Oh my
this,
gosh.
it's the climb, right? Like nobody starts a business so 200 people can report to them. That
No.
is not why we start businesses. And in fact, some people who start businesses hate it when they get to the point where 200 people report to them. So
Hmm.
it is figuring out on this journey, like you've got to have a learning mindset, a growth mindset about what and the roller coaster ride can be highs and lows in that journey. And so you've got to sort of like figure out what your supports are around you to navigate that.
What were some of your biggest hurdles as you were going through it, say operationally?
Well, starting a direct to consumer e-commerce business in 2003 was not easy. So I could start with that. Like we're
Yeah, let's talk
talking
about that. Because
you
that,
pre
yeah.
pre Facebook, pre Instagram, pre Shopify, or any other kind of platform that you would build a website on to do e-commerce. I remember when we tried to get merchant numbers so we could accept credit cards on our website, and nobody wanted to give them to us because we had quote unquote unsigned sales drafts, which meant that people could basically dispute the charge in perpetuity. And, so like all these challenges that we went through in those really early days just to get up on our feet and start operating were so different than what somebody would face today.
I
Right.
can't even
So,
imagine that. You forget there was a time when, you're talking about the
yeah.
credit cards, and I'm like, she's right. Like I'm thinking, looking it up, thinking, yeah, I remember when there's a time when you couldn't do that.
And people didn't want to put their credit card number in on the internet, and like so a lot has changed there. Other operational challenges I think are just as, once you get to people talk about that 20 employee number as being a time where HR becomes a more important thing. And, I don't know if that number's the exact number, but I can say that there's a point where you cross this bridge from having this founding team that's all really pulling in that same direction to a place where people have jobs, their family's livelihood relies on you to be
Mm.
able to pay them, and all of those things. And people having jobs isn't a bad thing. It's different though than those early founding days where people are working till 2 in the morning and it's like an adrenaline rush. And so crossing that sort of bridge to more systemization, bigger team, more communication, more management, more HR hiccups
Hmm.
is normal, but it can be a real challenge to like want to do it. Um, to figure out how you want to manage that team, be as a leader, all of those pieces, I think are challenging.
So I have a question for you.
Hmm.
Which was easier to accomplish, going from 0 to 6 figures or from 6 figures to 8 figures?
That's a really great question. And I mean, there's so much talk about like the quantum leap kind of stuff where, 7 figures is easier than six, right? Or
Hmm.
eight is easier than six. In some ways, I think eight was easier, although the inflection points that we hit of trouble were definitely bigger and more not disastrous, but like had that potential for like, you got to fix this or you're going to bring the ship down.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so it actually, in some ways, though, forces you to deal with things where when you're smaller, you can sort of brush it to the side and leave. And I think that the bigger you are, the more conscious you get of things like, oh, why are we struggling to make this decision? Like, by not being willing to decide and get off this fence, like the team's looking like we're making a decision here. The team's
Yeah.
watching us not decide. And so I think that
Mhm.
there's some impetus to keep moving and to deal with things when you're bigger because you have to. You cannot ignore them or they will sink that ship.
Yeah. The team's listening to us not decide.
Mm-hmm.
That right
Right?
there, right? That's a quote
Mm-hmm.
and a book in itself, because how many times do we not make decisions, but it's still a decision to not make a decision. And other
Yes.
people, that's an interesting
But I
statement then.
but I think we don't always think about that, right? We think, oh,
No.
I can I can decide later. It's like, no, I think you're deciding actually.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you're right.
so, yeah, it is that thing as well where, your leadership has to continually evolve. It's something that it doesn't ever stay static. And like I can say that even amongst, the founding group, like there was a time in the beginning where we'd all sit down and hash out the problems. And then the business starts growing and you have these portfolios and responsibilities and in your day-to-day job. And, it started to feel more like, no, I need to go away and have my sounding boards and kind of come and say, here's my recommendation and here's how I'd like to handle this. I'd like to get your approval. Here's the process I went through to make the recommendation, and like that's a really different way of operating than those early
Mm.
days. So it's a constant evolution, I think.
And then you made the decision to write a book,
I
Big
did.
Gorgeous Goals, which I love the name.
Thank you.
Talk to me a little bit
Yeah.
about this book. Is this
Mm.
about? Who is it for?
Yeah. Well, one of the definitions in the dictionary for gorgeous is magnificence. So I think about it as, you're stepping into your magnificence when you set big, gorgeous goals. And we all see people like there are people who will say, those women started Mabel's Labels in a basement and look, they sold an 8-figure business to a giant in their industry. And I'll say 13 years. My overnight success was
Yeah.
almost 13 years, right? And so I became interested and I struggled when I left Mabel's Labels in the after of selling the business. I never thought I would leave. I had nothing else to go to and I, cut off a limb when I decided to go. And I struggled to figure out what I would do next and I lost a lot of confidence. And in the process of getting back to my own big gorgeous goals, I started to really think about why some people do these things that seem amazing and then other people get kind of caught in the dust of their to-do list and their goals, trail off into smaller and smaller or expected or, you know, box checking kind of an idea. And what I found invariably was the overnight success always had, it had people, it had processes, and it had systems that was
Mm.
underpinning the ability to do any of those great things. No one does it alone and no one does it overnight.
Oh my gosh. Yes. And I laugh about when people think that it's so quick. And a lot of times people are looking at social media or website and,
100%.
they get the highlight reel. I always say this,
Yep.
and they don't know how long it took before you got to that highlight reel
Mhm.
and the
Or the
tears and
times
the
in the
grit
middle
and
of the
the,
night or the
yeah.
middle of the night scare you
Yes.
when you're like, "Oh." And, all of the things that go into the win. I think
Right.
we like to just, you post the win and everybody it is totally that highlight reel. I use
Yeah.
that term with my kids a lot about what they're
Mhm.
seeing.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to really explore what is under that, what underpins things for people. And so I interviewed actually 16 women's stories are in the book. Um, and just talking in conversation about why they think they were able to do what they did and what helped them. And, we all approach things like I'm the operationalizer, other people are the idea people. I interviewed all kinds of different people for the book. And the thing I found really, really interesting was there's a lot of agreement on what those underpinnings are that help us all get to the big things.
Ooh, and you have to get the book to find out what that is, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I have one more question for you. If somebody is listening and they're like, I want to do what she did, I want to get to 8 figures, what is some advice that you would give them?
Get really good at doing things over and over again. Because
Mhm.
scaling up is about repeatability and about finding processes that are stable and systems that can carry you. And, that quest for better and better and better over and over again is really important when you're on the road to 10 million and beyond. And there will be hard parts. There are common sticking points, common sizes there where everything seems to break. So
Mhm.
go out and find people like join a mastermind, hire an advisor, find a mentor, get a coach, find people to put around you who can help you. Because also, I think that entrepreneurship can be such a lonely road, and we
Mm.
owe it to ourselves to build a community to help us grow more efficiently, faster, and better.
Thank you so much for that. And if you guys are listening, hit the rewind and listen to what she said again. And the reason I share that is because a lot of times with small businesses, there's a fear of spending money to invest in yourself. And everything you listed was about investing in yourself, investing in your business. And from what I heard, that's key, getting the right people and not being afraid to put that money in because it comes back tenfold.
Yeah.
Julie, thank you so much for sharing. How can somebody find you if they're like, I want to work with Julie, I want to buy her book, I need her to help me. How do they reach you?
Probably the best place to find all of the different things about me are on my website at julieellis.ca.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. It has been an honor, a pleasure to talk to you and learn so much from you. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Awesome. Wonderful. All right, everybody. We will catch you next week. See ya.